and welcome to my presentation on Vladimir Peskin's Trumpet Concerto No. 1 in C minor. I'm Gabriel Avila, and today I want to discuss how Peskin bridges romantic expression and virtuosity with Soviet musical trends in his trumpet concerto. Before getting into that, let's establish some background on Peskin. Peskin, as seen in this picture, second from the left, was a Russian composer and pianist. He lived from 1906 to 1988 and was born in Irkutsk, Russia. Growing up, he didn't have the most stable home life. His family was very poor and faced many difficulties. For example, his mother was deported to the Kazakhstan steppes, his father was exiled to Geneva for 2 years, and he also had to take care of his younger brother who was still in school. Despite the difficulties of his life, he was a very gifted piano player who went to study under Feinberg at the Moscow Conservatory in 1922. He was also a pianist for the Balalaika Orchestra in the 1930s until he suffered a hand injury due to overuse. At that time, he had been getting interested in composing. He primarily composed vocal pieces that his mother Vera sang. He often used his own lyrics for these as well. He met the future trumpet legend Timothy Dockschitzer in the central building of the Red Army while playing for the Balalaika Orchestra. It was due to Dockschitzer that Peskin composed and arranged a lot of trumpet music. One of those pieces is his first trumpet concerto, which he dedicates to Dockschitzer. He influenced the playing style and repertoire heavily as he was the only trumpet player in the USSR allowed to make professional recordings. Dockschitzer promoted flashier and publicly more accessible music, which satisfied the ones from the government. Peskin's first piece for the trumpet was a scherzo, which was very technically challenging at the time. Peskin, after first hearing Dockschitzer perform this, said, "Had it been heard 100 years ago, you would have been proclaimed a devil as Paganini was." Now I want to briefly give as much context as I can about Peskin's first trumpet concerto. It was written in 1948, and this was Peskin's first real long-form piece for the instrument. He wrote this piece for Dockschitzer. Because of this, I think it's important to highlight some of the information I said previously. Them meeting in a military environment and Dockschitzer's preference to play flashier and more accessible music to the audience is important to note. According to Mary Horala, normally during this era of Soviet Russia, socialist realist works were considered to be programmatic. However, there was a belief that realistic music could also be non programmatic, though it had to have a socialist content. This piece by Peskin is non programmatic, meaning that he had to be more sure that he was following the rules of socialist realism. It was written in a late Romantic style, despite modern music taking more of the forefront in other parts of the world. As we will see later, this was due to socialist realism movement that was enforced in the Soviet Union during the time of Stalin. What was socialist realism? Socialist realism was a policy that was enforced in the 1930s during the Stalin era. It forced all art, literature, and music to abide by certain guidelines. These guidelines were ideanost, narodnost, klassovost, and partynost. In English, it means that music had to support the party ideology, have national and folk appeal, be class conscious, and support the party. There was also a belief that art had to serve three parts of Soviet society: the workers, peasants, and the elite. All of this was a tool for political propaganda, promoting communist ideals and way of life. One of the things about socialist realism was that it was difficult to decide how it should be applied to music, especially textless music. This led to the lessening of value for instrumental music and the idea that the ideological content of instrumental music could be seen as intelligible, meaning it could be censored, according to Richard Taruskin. I mentioned earlier how the concerto was written in a late Romantic style. During this time, formalism, modernism, and any abstract individualistic expressions didn't match Stalin's definition for socialist art that is national, informed, and socialist in content, according to Horala. It should be uplifting and glorify the achievements of the Soviet Union. According to Neil Edmonds, he took a quote from Vladimir Iolkosen, which said, "Socialist realism is above all a style of profound optimism. The whole historical experience of the proletariat is optimistic in essence, and we can and must affirm that optimism is intended as an obligatory feature of this style, its very essence." With that background on Peskin, his concerto, and socialist realism, I'd like to pivot back to talking about the concerto. More specifically, I'd like to dive into the music and talk about how Peskin blends traditions of the late Romantic era with Soviet stylistic trends, showing how Russian composers in the time of the Soviet Union maintained romantic musicality and virtuosity while conforming to the political and artistic constraints of Soviet cultural policy. The piece starts with a strong triumphant figure in the piano. These kinds of figures would look good for Peskin, as triumphant figures such as a fanfare and the one he wrote reflects well in the Soviet military. The trumpet comes in at measure 14 in a dark and mysterious fashion. The trumpet plays a hero role, which is an important part of socialist realism. According to Mary Horala, socialist realism developed its own positive hero, who integrated the most impressive qualities of a hero. The main literary heroes were the active builders of a new life: working men and women, collective farmers, Communist Party members, etc. Horala also talks about the heroicism inside of Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony, especially in the March theme in the second movement. Although the heroes in Shostakovich 5 and Peskin's concerto are different, the inclusion of a positive or hardworking hero was a good way to show that they were following the laws. Moving to a different Russian composer, Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto, also in C minor, includes the lower voices playing a quarter note ostinato, playing the root in the fifth. It reinforces the key that they're in. The piano in Peskin's concerto also has the same ostinato in the bass. This also propels the music forward. In fact, Peskin's concerto has a very similar feeling to Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto. Another similarity is the arpeggios in the piano. Both concertos have these sweeping arpeggios. Since Rachmaninoff really helped to establish the Romantic Russian sound, any homage that Peskin makes towards him would probably be approved in the eyes of the USSR. Moving on, the trumpet comes back in high and mighty at measure 29 and then starts to let down at measure 30 and 31. A more expressive section follows, contrasting the tough Soviet beginning with a more romantic and lyrical section. It allows Peskin and the performer to be a little bit more expressive. Something that happens frequently is the inclusion of virtuosic technical moments. These moments wow the audience, which is good by abiding by socialist realism, while also staying in the romantic concerto tradition. These moments follow Narodnost by having sections that audiences will think is impressive. This happens at measure 45 and 50. It also juxtaposes the romantic lyrical section we just heard, continuing this weaving in and out of a rougher, more Soviet style and a sweeter, more romantic style. This movement does a lot of this weaving in and out, which makes it the best example compared to the other movements between the bridge of Romanticism and Socialist Realism. To showcase this, I want to play a little bit of the first movement of this recording that has Doc Schutzer as a soloist. You can hear that strong fanfare figure a little bit. Oops. Moving on, the piece continues going in and out of Soviet and Romantic. The trumpet comes back in at measure 59 with a song-like melody. This section then leads to a more technical part while still maintaining the expressiveness we saw earlier. This combines the flashiness that Dr. Schutzer likes with the romantic expressiveness. In measure 113 to 116 of this section, we get a figure labeled marcato, imitating a fanfare. This signals in an interesting part where the trumpeter plays different modes within the key of concert E major, and then plays a set of tritone eighth notes, eventually landing on a high concert G. This leaves the listener in a weird spot tonally, which happens a lot in this movement. We get another example of this measure 217. These cadences make the music more complicated while building more tension. These cadences are great examples of maintaining romantic expression. At measure 145, we get a section that was probably written with Dr. Schutzer in mind, which means it'll capture the audience's attention. It's another technically demanding section which glorifies the hero figure and is within the concerto tradition of increased technical demands. We get a repeat of the main theme at measure 159 in the song-like passage like the one we saw at measure 59, but in concert D minor. This continues the weaving between the Soviet style and romantic expressiveness. Continuing with the concerto tradition, we reach the cadenza at measure 235. This cadenza maintains a dramatic and heroic feeling that has led up to it while still allowing a lot of self-expression. At measure 286, we get the recap followed by a very dramatic coda. This ending pushes the romantic expression to the side and makes it all about the performer and their technical ability, furthering the glorification of the musical hero. While the first movement in Peskin's concerto establishes the hero character with incredible displays in drama and technique, with some romantic expression sprinkled in, it's the second movement that Peskin is able to submerge the listener into a pool full of romanticism. He shifts from a display of assertiveness into a soaring lyrical melody. Like the second movement in other concertos, this movement is very sweet and expressive. The melody is in a song-like fashion, which reminds me of how he used to compose songs for his mother. The overall form is in line with the standard concerto, and the harmonies avoid complex dissonances that is more present within more modern music, which makes the music more accessible for the audience and goes against formalism. Like I previously said, the melody is in a song-like style. Because of this and its memorability, it's a great example of Narodnost, as it's easily accessible to the populace. This movement has a similar emotional feeling that the second movement of Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto brings. By recreating this movement from a mold created by Rachmaninoff, it pays tribute to the Russian Romantic style. Although this movement is very pretty, it still provides some classic Russian drama. The way it does this is by suspending its resolutions. We don't get a proper resolution in the tonic key of concert A flat major until 13 measures away from the end at measure 372. This movement is fairly straightforward. It provides beauty, emotion, and a little bit of drama, and it allows expressive and romantic musicality, which also appeals to the Narodnost requirements by the Soviets. I'll play just a little bit for you. You can hear the song-like style of this movement. Having immersed the listener in this very romantic and expressive world of the second movement, Peskin has to end his concerto with the return of his dramatic hero character, fulfilling the requirements of socialist realism. The third movement of Peskin's first trumpet concerto follows a rounded binary form, which stays in line with socialist realism since music is expected to be in a more traditional form. This third movement also follows the tradition of other third movements by being the last chance for the soloist to showcase their technical ability. Since this concerto was dedicated to Dockschitzer, an incredibly technically gifted trumpet player, Peskin might have increased the technical difficulty for him to show off. This technically focused third movement has a very heroic and triumphant tone, which would have been approved. To showcase this heroic and dramatic setting, I'll play a little bit of the beginning of the movement. The gritty, arpeggiated melody in the trumpet, accompanied by the dramatic piano, gives an image of a hero. The technique demanded by Peskin in this movement glorifies the Soviet hero, which in turn glorifies the nation. The A section mainly consists of this dramatic hero section, but we get a shift at the B section. At measure 441, we get a waltz. It's a classic dance form that we see in Russian works like Shostakovich's Jazz Suite and Glinka's Fantasia Waltz. It's a popular and standard form, making it not modernist. This complies even more with the rules of socialist realism as it gives the performer another opportunity to really express themselves before transitioning back. The transition brings back the dramatic hero that we heard earlier. Something important to note is its ending. Usually with socialist realism, the ending is supposed to be positive. That doesn't necessarily happen here. It clearly ends in C minor, and the coda doubles down heavily on that. I think that Peskin gets away with this since the piece is portraying a hero. The story is dramatic, but the end is very triumphant. Although it's not super happy all of the time, it still shows the hero defeating adversity. Music is interpreted differently by everyone, but one could say this is a representation of hardworking Soviet citizen or a member of the Soviet military. It makes sense that it wouldn't end on a bright and happy chord, since that isn't what the music is portraying necessarily. Peskin's Trumpet Concerto Number 1 in C minor succeeded where many other modernist pieces failed due to its use of Romanticism, providing a safe option for composing within the USSR. By staying away from formalism in favor of drama, heroism, and expressiveness, the concerto became friendly to the proletariat and to the nation, ultimately satisfying the four needs of socialist realism: Ideanost, Narodnost, Klassavost, and Partynost. This blend of romantic virtuosity and expressiveness with the demands of socialist realism shows an interesting relationship between artistic expression and political constraint. The piece is illuminated further when looking at the context of the piece, that context being the man it was dedicated to, Timothy Dockschitzer, the acclaimed Soviet trumpet player, and the military setting that both Peskin and Dockschitzer were in. With this knowledge, the dramatic and heroic first and third movements can be seen as a showcase for the Soviet military and a display of Dockschitzer's ability. The second movement can be seen as one of the only respites from this military style. The concerto stands as an incredible piece of music in history, demonstrating how an artist can still express themselves while complying with the constraints set by Soviet Union during that era. Here are all of my works cited. Thank you very much.